Just a quick note before today's show. While we have transformed our entire platform to respond to the ongoing crisis, increasing our production of both podcast episodes and blogs, we cannot continue without your support. Please consider making a donation or contributing as a volunteer to support our active engagement at this critical time. Saw Kapi, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Inside Myanmar podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity. I grew up in Myanmar until I was 18 or 19. Then I spent quite a few years along the Thai-Burma border in 1988, from 1988 to 1994. Then I migrated to the United States. I stayed there, lived there, went to school there, studied for quite a few years, and worked in higher education sector for about 11 years until I returned to Burma in early 2013. Since then, I have been working in education sector, and I am also currently started a school called the School of Governance and Public Administration, and I am the founding director of it.
Thank you. Great. That's a massive biography of work and accomplishment at warp speed. So we'll get into each parts of that journey. Starting with just your background, you mentioned being from Taungu, and then in 1988, of course, a very important year going to the border. So can you share about your background growing up in Taungu, a bit of your family life and neighborhood life as far as is comfortable, and then what drove you to the border in that pivotal year?
Yes. This is very interesting part of my life, actually. I grew up in Taungu until I was 18. I was then second year a college student, a government technical college student there. But in 1988, August, May, June, July, August, September, students uprising broke out in the country. I joined the students' movement for democracy at that time. And then September 18, when the military took over power the first time, not 2021, on September 18, 1988. After that, I stayed in the country or lived in the country about a month after military coup. Then I came to the Karen resistance area. So getting involved in students uprising and being part of the democracy struggle in 1988 was the reason I had to come to the Thai-Burma border and join the student resistance forces at that time.
So when you were involved in the 1988 uprising, that was in Taungu, or you came to Yangon?
It was in Taungu, because I was going to college in Taungu, and I started joining the movement in Taungu.
So I think we've heard a bit of documentation about what was going on in Yangon and even Mandalay during those 1988 uprisings. Not so much that I'm familiar with Taungu. So can you paint that scene for us of what was happening there?
Yes, actually, in Taungu, not relatively small, but Taungu is also an ancient capital of Burmese dynasty, and after demonetization crisis in the country around May. After that, Taungu was a quiet, not a lot of things going on at that time, but starting on August 1988, on that day, I think mass protest started or began in Taungu. So the whole country, so Taungu, population in Taungu joined the whole country, also led by students. Believe it or not, there was only a technical college, but students from Yezin University came down to Taungu and also participated in demonstration, and the whole city, we marched in Taungu, and then we that was the beginning of mass movement or mass protest in a city called Taungu, and that's when I started basically my political movement, as when I was 18.
Right. And one of the things I've heard about 88 that's been different in how things have developed since in 2021 is just how interethnic it's been, how much diversity and solidarity we've seen here versus in 1988, where it was largely Bamar student-led. And so what were your experiences at that time of being a student on the ground and seeing the Bamar involvement in Bamar student involvement in some of those early protests against the military, and to what degree there was representation from people of different backgrounds?
Actually, in 1988, it wasn't only Bamar student at the time, but there were students from different ethnic backgrounds also participated in the student movement at the time, but they did not really articulate, or they did not really make their identity known. Meaning the protest at that time did not take the ethnic dimension. There was no ethnic dimension to that. Student from Burma, and that's it. And we just have to remember that we just came out of the socialist era. So the country had been very closed, very close to the outside world for a long, long time, almost 26 years. And therefore people at that time did not have, we were basically oppressed, and the country was shut and very close. We were in a closed society until 1988, and therefore people just did not mention their ethnicity.
Right.
But in actuality, different students from different ethnic background participated in it, and it's a pretty broad student movement, but very liberal. Consider very forward-looking and progressive. Consider the time they had to start that movement.
That's very interesting that you're talking about a consciousness of locked in that particular period in time and history and place of how ethnicity, identity, community was understood differently then than it is now. And I think it's good to hear that description from someone who was there, because sometimes and that just doesn't just happen in Burma, it happens in many countries, where we superimpose kind of modern political understandings of what's correct and right to say onto previous eras and generations where there was just simply a different mindset that doesn't so much accord with how we like to see things today, but sometimes hard to judge the past in that same way through those same lens. And so then for you particularly, how has identity played a role in understanding who you are and your role and part in the movement that was happening and the work that you're doing?
Yes. Identity played a very important role all throughout my life, of course. And even in 1988, when we decided to come to the ethnic resistance area, because I am a Karen, also I came to the Karen ethnic resistance area, Karen National Union control area at that time. But as part of being a part of the struggle, student identity at that time, or my identity as a student, was a lot more important and a lot more politically significant than my identity as a Karen.
Right.
So I do have dual or even triple identities. However, in terms of political movement, in terms of political consciousness, and in terms of participating in these democratic struggles, my identity as student was at the forefront at the time. So identity plays a very important role, but ethnic identity at the time took second seats, and my identity as students and the student movement, student-led struggle or movement took the front seat or the front row at the time.
So that leads to a question of, you're in your understanding, you're a student first, and Karen coming from the Karen community second, and the ambitions and aspirations of the student-led movement is really what's compelling you. It's largely Bamar-led, but not entirely. But it's really the ideology that's driving it rather than identity-based. But as a Karen, as someone who's non-Bamar in this wider movement, how did you feel accepted and understood by your student peers, many of them who were Bamar?
Yes. It was very interesting. Actually, it was I came to the Thai-Burma border at that time with three other friends. Three other friends. Two of them were my classmates or schoolmates at the time, college mates at that time, and one other was a university student from Moulmein University, Moulmein University at the time when we call it. And one of them, four of us came to the Thai-Burma border. I'm a Karen. My other one are a Muslim friend from Moulmein University, and another friend was a Chinese, a Sino-Burmese, a Chinese Myanmar friend or student at the time, and there was a Burma friend, a Burma student. So four of us came to the Thai-Burma border from different ethnic backgrounds or different ethnic identity or cultural background, but we accept each other. We accept each other, but one commonality that we had was that our political consciousness, the reason we want to establish democracy or we wanted democracy in the country, came to us, or we were able to gain that political consciousness through student identity or being students. Because in Myanmar, until now, I think students-led movement or student-led progressive movements are very very historical, because even independent movement was also led by students' movement as well, and the role students play all throughout the history of the country was very significant, and people were very proud of it, and students are very proud of it, and we were part of that trend as well.
Right. And I've spoken to different 88 activists, Bamar activists largely, who have described what it was like to go from Bamar urban areas to then ethnic village life, and how different and challenging those circumstances were, from food to living conditions, language, and relations as well. Some of the tensions that existed between some of the animosity and the mistrust that some of the ethnic groups had. You're a Karen ethnicity living in a somewhat urban place in terms of Taungoo. It's certainly not the jungle, not a big city like Yangon, but more of an urban place, going to a university, a state university, and then going from there to your own ethnic Karen region, but much more underdeveloped, and a place that's been under conflict for so long. And so in what sense did you feel like it was some degree of coming home? In what sense did it feel like a foreign place that you had to adjust?
Yes. Of course, obviously I felt both, right? To some extent it was about coming home, because I also developed I also started learning ethnic struggle, or the political struggle or political side of ethnic struggles when I started coming to the Thai-Burma border and started joining ethnic resistance movement or student movement in the jungle at the time. And because we didn't get to read a lot of these histories when we were in the city, so we did not know. But I started learning, and when we came or arrived in the KNU or Karen National Union or Karen Resistance area, with political leaders, we feel like we didn't feel a lot of different treatment, because political leaders at that time knows and understand student movement. They themselves at some point were students leader, even in the city themselves too. But the local area people, the local area meaning, for example, villagers or people who are very local in those areas or along the Thai-Burma border at the time, throughout their whole life, the only people that they know as Burma is the soldier.
Yeah.
So soldiers, Burmese soldiers and Burma people are synonymous to them. And therefore, their understanding and the way they perceive students or the way they perceive Myanmar students were quite different. Right? They feel they don't trust, they didn't trust. They also would like to understand better. Also, I think also from the side of Burma students, the way Burma students understand them also was very different, because when you are, for example, part of ethnic rebel or ethnic resistance movement, you are termed as insurgents, terrorists, etc. All these bad people who do not, who do not know how to behave civilized in a civilized manner, and therefore misunderstanding or misperception towards each other. But to some extent, I had to play also a bridging role. And I think it didn't take us very long. A year or two, we were able to establish trust, and I think it worked out quite well. But of course, the population that remained in the city, however, they didn't get to learn it until, for example, in the recent round of military coup.
And so then what exactly were you doing and spending your time with in the border regions in 1988?
Yes, I first joined, of course, the military. We had to undertake military training, and then we were in the military battalion. But later, I also joined the teaching force because not a lot of people who can teach or who have some education background. So I was recruited into the teaching. So I started teaching for a high school in a place not very far from Mesot at that time too, and then later I moved down to the southern Teninai area. At that time, 2/3 of the Teninai region that we know today were controlled or was under the control of Karen National Union. So I went down there and served as teachers and also under the mining department at the time for about 3.5 years until I migrated to the United States too.
So that was really quite some time where you were continuing with the revolution with the hope that you would see success after 1988.
Yes, that was quite altogether almost like 4 years and eight months. I decided we decided to migrate to the United States. It took us 4 years and a half because we wanted to give it a try, but I also quickly realized that education was very important. We need to make sure we are able to, for example, understand our own struggle, and we the revolution or the resistance movement itself has its own political goal, and also in order to achieve our political goal, we need to also help our people gain some education, and therefore those of us who had a little bit of education background needed to continue our education, and that's the very reason that I decided to leave and pursue further education.
So in the revolutionary struggle and in the new country you wanted to create in overturning military rule, it was really education that you started to invest your time and importance into, knowing how to be an educator yourself, and then how to share that with the future in the country you'd like to see. I think this is also interesting because at this time, as we see today as well, people that are coming from different backgrounds trying to see what they can contribute are landing on different areas of focus that are central to them. And I'm highlighting this now because this early area of focus that you started to gravitate to, this, of course, has shaped your whole journey up until contemporary times going forward, is this role of education.
Exactly. It depends on how long things take, how long the resistance or the movement takes as well, right?
Yeah.
Because if the revolution takes about 8 months to a year, or maybe 2 years, it's okay. But when the revolution takes more than 10 years, 20 years, we cannot afford to let the whole generation grow up without education at all. And to the extent to which we can provide basic education in the revolution area is quite limited, or especially a lot more limited at that time. So we understood early on that some of us needed to continue and further our education. Some of us need to continue be part of the revolution, and also some of us need to be part of forces that continue to provide education or whatever education that we can provide in the resistance area as well. Simply because if we allow generation after generation growing up without proper and a certain level of education, then that danger is even more dangerous, or the danger is bigger than growing up under military rule, simple military rule only. Right?
Yeah,
So,
and these cycles are just so devastating because you never kind of get out from under of the putting out fires everywhere and having to recover. And so trying to actually build something sustainable, whether it's education or infrastructure or economy or whatever it is, there's never really the time and focus to not be harried and recovering and surviving, which is of course what the military wants. And so it sounds like you're having to simultaneously figure out how to manage education in extremely less than ideal circumstances, because that's all there is and that's all it seems there's going to be going forward, while also trying to build an education system predicated on the hope that one day there will be peace to be able to make these plans possible.
Yes, definitely. Because if we really think about it, we understood that it's almost impossible for the whole generation or whole population will get a chance to migrate and continue their education in another country. That's not possible either. It's almost impossible for us to build our own education system and provide quality education in our area without some of us gaining or getting more higher level or more advanced education from somewhere else too. And therefore the resisting the oppression, and also building up our own political foundation, and in the meantime continuing to live and continue to build up a whole new generation with a certain level of education is also very important. And therefore all these things have to take place simultaneously, and different people or different part of people from different part of the struggle have to take their own responsibility and try to do. We just need to coordinate, and it has to be simultaneous as well.
It's just so much to bear thinking about it. It's just remarkable. Again, I've heard these stories so many times, but just to think about the intergenerational turmoil and pain and devastation that's gone on, and yet while that's happening, how many people and organizations have continued to try to rebuild even in the midst of destruction.
Yes, and that's the continued struggle that we are engaging until today, right? Because this is even now we don't know when the struggle will end, and it will probably never end, but it has to transform itself from one stage to the next, and we need to make sure we progress and we advance, and therefore people, if we happen to be, because not all of us were ready to pursue our education abroad either, because you need to have a certain level or certain access to a certain opportunity. So we played our own role, and we just want to make sure everyone has their own role to play, and we just need to coordinate and synergize. We need to synergize.
It really just, you can't help but hear this and just think about what a metaphor for really lightness and darkness, battling this eternal battle of these different forces that have come together for so long and that are continuing to this day. But then looking at your journey, so you mentioned in 1988 you go to the border, you stay almost 5 years there, and then you realize you want to go to higher education in the US. So tell us what that was like.
So of course at that time opportunity came up for us to be able to migrate to the United States as refugee. So I simply started everything from the very beginning again. So because I was a college student in 1988, but of course I didn't bring any evidence. We have to even reestablish our own identity when we migrated. So back then, I started going to school called adult school. So it's for people who are over 18 and who needed to, for example, brush up their English and also computer skills and typing skills, etc. So I started from adult school and then prepare myself to take GED, General Education Development, which is the equivalent of high school diploma. So it took me about 8 months to prepare myself for GED test, and then started going to community college. It takes another 2 years to finish community college and then transfer to a 4-year school. So it's a step-by-step approach. One has to be very diligent and have to have focus. You have to focus and, okay, I'm going to try to finish my education, because by the time I started my college, most of my classmates were a lot younger than me, and I at least I was about 4 to 5 years older than most of my classmates at the time. But we understand the value, the importance of education, especially in the resistant revolutionary setting, and therefore we took our steps.
And this is not just an educational journey you're continuing, but also this cultural transformation of now being in America, being away from your homeland for even longer and even further away. What was that like at a personal level?
It was quite difficult at the very beginning. Because I felt like my body was in the United States, but my mental state or my thinking, a lot of my thinking, I was still in the jungle or with the resistance or most of my comrades in the jungle at the time. But I also know that, okay, I was given this opportunity. I need to make sure I am able to take it and then educate myself. And therefore, at the very beginning, we tried to make a lot of friends. But fortunately, we arrived at a small town in California at the time, Central California. We were able to start taking classes, and through friends and new friends and through different organizations' support, we were able to enroll ourselves in college. So started taking classes, and we were very fortunate and blessed in many ways that we encounter professors who understood our, what we have to struggle. And this is what is, I think I appreciate most about U.S. education system. Community college systems is I think, is very unique to U.S. education system. And professors there are very community oriented. So they want to know our personal story, our background, and when they try to help us, counsel us based on our own experience as well. So it was difficult, but we were able to go through because of our, the good people that we encounter at community college and adult school as well.
So that was a lot of years of schooling in America.
Yes, altogether, basically as soon as I arrived in the United States, I started working as a dishwasher for almost 4.5 months.
What part of the country was that?
It's in Bakersfield, California.
Right.
Yes, it's in Bakersfield, California. I started washing dishes in my first job for 4.5 months. Later, I moved to a new job at a hospital. I do hospital transportation, and because they allow us to work weekends and also in the evening, and daytime we took classes. We started taking classes in typing and basic English and a little bit of office work, filing, etc. Because we need some skills in order to be able to move up to a better, a more decent job as well. But we were able to do that and go to school at the same time, and it took us about 2.5 years at the community college until we were able to transfer to 4-year college.
And then which college did you go to?
I went to San Francisco State University, California State University, San Francisco. little did I know that it was a very expensive city, but I wanted to study international relations and transfer there, partly because we also had a friend who offered us a very reasonably cheap housing or accommodation right near San Francisco, and I commute from the place to the university, the university is in the heart of the town.
Right. So you complete your education in America, still feeling psychologically like part of you is back in the jungle with the resistance, and ultimately end up with a degree. And so what happens next at that time in your story? How old are you, what year it is, and where do you go next?
So I said I went to school six and a half years straight because I continued my graduate study right after undergraduate as well. After graduate school, I just applied for jobs. At that time, you have to go through newspaper or Sunday paper or weekend papers and go through all the job announcements and apply for it. I applied for different jobs, and without knowing what I will get, what kind of job I will get, I applied for different jobs. But I started, very fortunately, I got a job at University of San Francisco, which is a private university, Jesuit university in the city of San Francisco. I started working there as almost like a credit evaluators at the university. So little did I know what I was going to do, but they train us, right? They train us. So unintentionally, I got into higher education sector in the United States without prior planning. That wasn't really what I planned or what I knew before. But I was given opportunity to start working there. So I started working for university one after another, right? The first university was University of San Francisco, then University of Maryland, College Park. Then I came back to California State University in Bakersfield, where I served as university admission officer, director for over a year there. Before I returned to Burma.
And tell us about that, because that's really where the work you're doing now, the current adventure, really takes another level, and your story intersects with the story and development of Burma itself.
Yes. It was in 2011 that I moved back to California. I started working for California State University in Bakersfield. But come 2012, more like we began to see not ideal situation, but the transformation began to some extent, meaning semi-civilians or allow civilians, leaders were allowed to participate in political process. And always throughout my educational journey, whenever I wrote essays for my educational journey or for scholarships here and there that I wrote my essays, I always said, okay, after my school or my education, if there is an opportunity to go back to the country and do something, contribute back to the political process, I wanted to. So even though I was only in 2011 that I moved back to California, a year later, I started talking to our friends and, hey, these are the things that are going on in the country. Are we interested in we always thought about contributing what we learned or what we have gained back to the country, and therefore we began to think about it very seriously. So 2012 December, I and a couple other friends decided to at least go back to Yangon, apply for visa, go back to Yangon and see what we can do. So our first few 28 days at that time was just observation and look for, okay, what can we do? Can we really do anything? So we started in 2012 December, but I actually did not go back and work until 13 November or so. So it's a year later, after the first time going back to the country, that I started settling in Yangon and started working there.
And what work was that when you started?
I worked for an organization called the BA Education Foundation, at the BA Education Foundation, and we run some bridge education program, college preparation program, prepare students for their overseas studies or further studies abroad, those kind of thing, and also teaching them critical thinking, how to do critical analysis, to write their own analytical papers, both in English and Burmese, etc. So we started with basically basic critical thinking and some social science or social studies classes that we think are key and foundational to their further learning.
What was that like to be back in your native country after so long away and such hardships that you personally endured and the country itself endured, and then this budding opening with the transition and doing and starting preliminary work in the field you love of education? What was that experience like for you?
Yes, it was. I had a mixed feeling at the time. The transition we knew wasn't ideal at all, but we wanted to give ourselves a chance to try to do whatever we can. So we went back. I went back, and we were not really welcomed by the political elites or people who were in charge, politically in charge of the country at that time. But I quickly realized that when I started talking to young people in the country, they have so much energy. And they are so inquisitive. They are intellectually inquisitive. And that inquisitiveness that triggers me, okay, we need to make sure we jump onto this energy and try to do whatever we can in order to bridge them or that energy with the real opportunity. Because even though they are intellectually inquisitive, they have a lot of energy, we also see that there is a big gap between the actual opportunity and where they are currently are. And that's how I began to see my role and our role, people like us, the role we can play. So that's why we started thinking about being the bridge or building the bridge to be able to connect them, that energy, that inquisitiveness, or people, young generation who are very inquisitive, with opportunities that they can get. And I think we also realized at that time that the country was so far behind. Because, the physical infrastructure, the damage of the physical infrastructure is one thing. But the damage that the military regime has caused to people's psyche and thinking, and there are so many intangible and not so obvious damage that the era that military regime rule caused to the younger generation. And therefore we think, okay, we need to do whatever we can. They have a lot of hope. They have hope, and they are so glad to see us coming back to the country as well. So even though, honestly speaking, we were not welcome by the political elites at all, or not that political elite invited us to begin with, but we went back to the country, and I went back to the country in order to work directly with these younger generations, who I think should be the leaders, should become the leaders of the country. And today we see in the post-2021 military coup movement in the country, that generation that gained access to the outside world and gained access to education abroad are now basically, they have a different level of thinking, and they are now basically leading the movement and the transformative transformation process of the country right now. And I think that's what the current military regime is surprised by.
Yeah. That's really remarkable because you're talking about leaving the country in '88 as a young person, a student yourself, and then coming back in 2012 as now an educator and a more mature person. And so you have this sudden contrast that you're able to make because you did not see and feel the gradual development. You have this before and after kind of approach that you're able to contrast very clearly 1988 youths to 2012 youths and then to post 2021 youths as well. But just staying on that contrast between 88 and 88, of course, the country had been closed for quite some time and had its own isolationist policy and was not, as far as I understand, was not in great educational shape even up to that point. But how would you, being an educator, a young person, someone who's worked with young people all these times, what are there examples you can give or more details or colors you can provide as to the 2012 things you were finding in youths, showing you, providing you evidence that there had been a serious degradation from 1988 and the time that you'd been out?
Yes. I mean, especially upon my arrival back in the country in 2012, December, I visited a lot of educational places where people gather for education, even though they were not formal education institutions. And also I visited some formal education institutions as well. That's what I do wherever I go anyway until now. And then I began to think that, okay, on the one hand, a large number of populations, a large portion of segment of populations, they were in that very damaged education system and did not even know what they missed. I did not even know what they missed. But there are also a small segment of population out there who, for example, not through formal education channel, but through different education center, including like, for example, American Center, the British Council, and also there are some church-based, privately led offices and institutions that they get access to, for example, the taste of education, education outside of the country. That's the population that, for example, understand, okay, they get a taste of it, they want more of it.
Yeah.
And therefore, when we meet and we talk to them, I was surprised by their ability to think critically. And I was surprised by some of the questions that I received when I started talking to them. Oh, you didn't get a formal education and you never study critical thinking, or you did not grow up in the critical education and traditions. But you asked me this question and I began to learn that they study and they learn that from outside on their own. And therefore, okay, this is something that we need to, nurture and look for ways to be able to provide them more opportunities. But I think the difference also is that overall openness of, opening up of the country as well. Because by the time I left in 1988, I had never had the chance to touch on a computer keyboard.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And also we did not have email. We did not know what email was at the time in 1988 at all. So, but by 2012, they began to use internet. They began to use, communicate or mode of communication, modern electronic communication. So they were able to utilize that and be able to access even more to knowledge, to a little bit more easily, right? More accessible, more accessible to them. And I think that's what makes a huge difference for that particular generation. Because I remember when I came to the jungle in 1988, I brought with me 3 or 4 books. And when I had nothing to do in the jungle, just keep on reading the 4 or 5 books again and again, because we didn't have any other sources of materials to read from. Because if we didn't bring, or somebody didn't bring it to us, we didn't have anything. But that generation in after 2012 is very different. And I think the going in of a lot of international organizations also brought other opportunities for them to gain access to the outside world.
Right. But on your visit in 2012, just at the very beginning as the transition's just kicking off, you found that the students that you were meeting, the young people that you were in contact with, that there was a drop-off from 1988. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Because from 1988 to 2012 is about 20 years, right? 20 years, that was a whole generation.
Yeah.
So the generation that I met in 2012 is a generation after us, a generation, one generation after us. So they grew up entirely under military rule.
Yeah.
They did not know.
Yeah.
So and therefore those who have a taste of education outside of the formal education sector are the ones who, number one, maybe by ways of their parents or people who they know, or churches or organizations, or people who are in Yangon, probably who have access to certain organizations or certain education institutions. It's right, that's what they had. But you have to have a willingness or a desire, or you have to be inquisitive enough to have access to the rare access to education outside of the formal education sector. And that's a population that I think we have to start with in order to build a critical mass for us to have a transformative power, right? Because to transform the rest of the country, it's not a one person or a small group job, but we need a critical mass. And I think between 2012 and 2021 or so, I think we were able to build that critical mass or the critical generation. And I think that's the generation that is now taking the lead in many sectors in the resistance movement and many parts of the movement that is going on right now too.
Yeah, so tell us about those 9 years then, because we've been talking up to this point really just about your re-entry back in 2012 and contrasting that with 88, but then tell us about, in more detail, these 9 years that you're there up into the coup and as you've just indicated, inferred just now, the real confidence you had and the ability of work you were able to do and the growth you were able to have in the education with the students and where it was going, and then what it gave to that student body in terms of what they were able to do after 2021. After to set the scene again, you come in 2012, you on a 28-day visa, you're not welcomed at all by the military elite, and looking for opportunities of what you can do, visiting different educational facilities. So take us back to that initial visit and tell us how those next 9 years panned out for you.
Yes. So first, it was a visit, 28 days visa. It was a visit. So try to visit as many places as possible and try to meet with as many people as possible. And of the people that we met, I try to also meet with as many young people as possible too. So it was a visit, but it was intentional. And the intention was to be able to meet as many young people as possible too. The learning age, right? As many young people as possible. And so after that visit, we wanted to do something, and we see the gaps. I saw the gaps, what the gaps are, and then wanted to, of these many gaps that we saw, which area we can fill. So begin to think about it. I began to think about it a little bit more. And later I joined that education foundation, and I realized also that of the many people that I spoke with, all these inquisitive and very young people who have strong desire to learn are mostly from Yangon area. So when we started, or I went back to the country and started different education programs, we gave emphasis to opportunity for marginalized young people who are from other parts of or outside of Yangon. Of course, people who are in Yangon also need help, But I think we also would like to give or provide as even opportunity as evenly as possible to those who are from different parts of the country as well. So the education program that we started thinking about, or we started providing, was meant for, or we target students from marginalized communities. And when I say marginalized community, it's not only marginalized ethnic communities, but a multi-ethnic community. So therefore, we have students from Sagaing, Magui, Mandalay, Kachin, Karen, Karenni, all these different parts of the country. So we created that program. We invite them to come to Yangon. We train them for 9 months. 9 months, and during the 9 months, critical thinking class and basic social science and some basic international relations, and also English classes that we offer to them. And we basically prepare them also for them to be able to apply for scholarships and continue their education abroad. Not all of them will eventually get scholarship, but majority of them, some way, somehow, if not immediately after 9 months preparation, it might take them a year or maybe a couple more year after that, but eventually they will some way somehow got opportunity. They will get some way somehow get opportunity to either study in universities in Thailand or in the regions, or some of them are in the Western countries as well. Of course, they have to apply for scholarship, but we prepare them for the scholarship opportunities that they need to apply for as well.
And how safe did you feel during this time with the political developments taking place? And you're in education, which, as much as one would like to think that education is outside of politics, in Myanmar, it's not. Very little is outside of politics in Myanmar. So to what degree were you feeling safe, both for you, your colleagues, your institution, your students, and what you were doing?
First of all, in Myanmar, education is highly political. And to be specific, education is highly politically contentious. Education sector is.
Right.
So I went back into the country fully aware of the fact that education can be highly political and politically contentious as well. But first and foremost, I thought of myself like I am coming back to my own country, my native country. And my conscience was very clear too that we wanted to do this in preparation or preparing the next generation, the future generations, not to damage or destroy or cause troubles to the country, to the political process, to the country too.
Yeah.
So we made it known, but we kept ourselves low profile most of the time. We didn't want unnecessary attention, or I didn't want unnecessary attention either, especially the first few years.
Yeah.
So we tried to do whatever we could very quietly, but also as somebody who, for example, speak the language, English language, and also lived abroad for so many years, look for access or opportunities abroad, and maybe also connect people from inside and people from outside, or new visitor who are coming to the country, for whoever we already know or establish communication with or contact with. We try to build that bridging, play the bridging role as well. And I quickly realized that it takes a whole process, because from the start of inviting or bringing young people from rural or different parts of the country to Yangon, try to settle them and train them for about 9 months. And then after that, we also have our alumni activities until they are able to connect with opportunities for them to be able to study abroad, etc. It takes several steps. It takes several steps, and we worked in partnership with a lot of community-based organizations. But we are always cautious. I was always cautious, but I wasn't really afraid or felt my security was in jeopardy at any time. Partly because I knew quite a lot of people who are in political positions
Yeah.
as well, except that I wasn't part of that bigger political process, or I wasn't part of it, and didn't really want to be part of the movement. But my focus was on education. But we do know a lot of people in this other political sector too.
Did things change after the 2015 elections and the LD was in power in terms of your feeling of safety, or not so much?
Not so much. Not so much. Actually, 2015 election, I felt did not really bring us significant change that I thought it would have brought. However, I think we accept the fact that they cannot also, or the party that came into power after 2015 elections did not have all the powers that we thought they should have, or they have either.
Yeah.
So the hands are tied. They came into political power with certain string attached. I think the 2008 constitution itself is a string that is attached to them, and also they cannot do everything they wanted to do, and we understand that. We just accept that as a fact, and we do what we could within the given space that we had at that time.
Right. Now, you mentioned how the result of what you were doing those 9 years had an immediate impact in empowering and training, working with that young generation after the coup.
Yes. One good example, or a few good examples, are, number one, for example, we recruited some young people from Calais city in Sagaing region. They came to Yangon. They joined our program. Then they didn't get scholarship immediately, but we put them into internship program in our office for almost a year, when they were still looking for or applying for scholarship to study abroad, and they score, or they did well enough that they gained scholarship later, study for 2 years at University University of Peace, the Costa Rica and the Philippines, the joint program, and then came back to the country. And another one study in Thailand. There are a few other who study also in Hong Kong. They came back after 2 years of their study, and one of them started educational institutions in Rakhine, and the other ones are now leading pretty well-known civil society organizations that are engaging in movement against military dictatorship in the country as we speak. And that, I think, is very rewarding to know, because 9 years is about half of one generation, right? Half the period of what we call one generation. And I think seeing them leading civil society organizations, seeing them establish or founding community-based education institutions, and some of them we even see them lead educational reform movement, and one, for example, even write international level articles and also advocacy paper, etc. I think that's another level of movement.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great to hear and to see that direct connection. And then in your own journey, at some point you start to shift or maybe transition from the focus on education to the focus on governance. So tell us about what brought on that change in what you were doing.
Yes, that's interesting. Very interesting too. Because, like I said before, from 2012 to 2021, I was focusing on education sector 90% of the time. Of course, education is a very political sector, and therefore we had to engage in, for example, the system reform, because we cannot just train be the bridge and train the younger generation, but we were also engaging in system reform process, right? So education system reform, etc., that we got involved. But we also we were aware that, for example, international community and also inside the country, there were attempts to fix the country from the roof. For example, different organizations attempt to, okay, how do we change 2008 constitutions? How can we change the luto, the parliamentary process? And how can we get nationwide ceasefire agreement and transform the country at the very top and roof level? And I think both international communities and people inside the country spent a lot of their efforts, energies, and time and money, resources for that process in the last 10 years. But because the military, Myanmar military itself, is not a credible partner to the process, 2021, February the 1st, we know what happened. So my thinking was that, okay, we give ourselves a chance for about 10 years to try to improve and fix the country also from the top, the roof. But now it is time for us to start doing something from the ground up. And I think I started thinking about it, and 3 months after military coup, I came back to the Thai-Burma border. I came back to the Thai-Burma border because after that time, a lot of young people came to the border and tried to join resistance forces, and starting to join resistance forces. So I said, okay, the same thing that happened in 1988 will happen again. And therefore, I came back to the Thai-Burma border and I said, okay, we need to, because the last 10 years prior to 2021, we put all our efforts and emphasis on Naypyidaw and Yangon and cities inside the country. We did not pay attention to these ethnic resistance areas at all. So when a lot of young people left the city and came to the Thai-Burma border, to the resistance areas, how should they manage? Sometimes we complain, okay, how do they accept these young people who come to these areas? So we came back and I said, okay, we need to start helping build the capacity of these different governance entities in the different localities or different regions and different ethnic areas as well. And the best way to do is to create capacity building and educational programs in governance and public administration. So public administration is almost like an add-on component, because when you are in revolutionary mode, you think about revolution, you think about governance and political change. But people don't really think about provision of public services and protecting the people and the public themselves. And therefore, we added that public administration component, and we started thinking about helping build the capacity of people who are engaging or participating in different resistance movements. On the other hand, I also understood that we need to prepare a new generation of public servants or civil service people, public administrators as well. Because in Burma, we have about 350 townships. If you look at all the 350 township administrators, majority of them, almost 90% of them, were former military captains. we cannot build a new country with this administrative force. And therefore, it is important that we begin to train a new generation of public administrators. And therefore, we started offering this online program that takes about 6.5 months for people who are interested in participating in administering township and districts in the country in a new setting in the future. So that's how we switched our focus from a more conventional education to somewhat demand-based capacity building programs that we continue to run until today.
This is a really key point. I want to go back to the example you gave of what it's like to have a former military man being in a position of local governance authority, which you referenced, 90% are in that position, and the type of training that you're offering to civilians to go and undertake and be in that position. And I wonder if you could flesh out in more tangible terms what the difference is in terms of when you have those former military, largely men, I assume, if not all, in those positions, how they look at that position, how they interact with the local community, what their mindset is and how they're seeing that position, and then the problems that develop at a very local level as a result of that. And then in a direct response to the evaluation that you've obviously made of why it's a problem to begin with, because you wouldn't have a training unless there was a problem to fix it, what you're trying to do in your training with this new class of civil servants you're hoping to bring up, what skills and mindset you're trying to impart to them, which will be a real departure from what we've seen up till now.
Yes. First and foremost, when you are a trained military personnel and you come into the civil local governance sector, what they think about 90% of the time is to control the populations, to control the resources, to control the income or the revenue sources. So that's what they are very good at, and that's what they have been doing all along. So, but they don't think about it in terms of provision of public services and public servant mindset. I serve the public mindset is not there. And the other major the other key point is people who came from military, people who think about control most of the time, they report and they see their accountability upward only. Right. They do not see they are accountable to the people, and downward accountability is not at all in their mind. They don't have that thinking at all. So they think about, okay, I am responsible for accountable to, for example, my superior, Ministry of Interior, and then Minister of Ministry of Interior or Home Affairs is also appointed by or appointed through the confirmation of the Commander-in-Chief, and therefore, in a sense, a military personnel too. Right? So it's all about military control and military benefits from this administration too.
Yeah, and when you're talking about being accountable to your military superior, in other words, being accountable means how much profit can I reap from this local place in order to personally give to this superior personally or for whatever fiefdom that he has. And so you're really the incentives for those accountability. It's just getting further and further corrupt into this kind of like mafia terrorist outfit that is just reaping the benefits from the people without any accountability or transparency or provisions to them. It's all being taken from them into these higher level fiefdoms.
Exactly. And not only personally, but also to sustain that very institution, right? That very institution that produced that kind of people too, right? So that's what they do. That's what they're very good at. So for us, we try to change that, and we see that in two different directions or two different perspectives. One is provision of public services. People who are the closest have to be done by people who are the closest to the community on the ground. So almost like, in a way, a subsidiarity approach. Subsidiarity approach, or the concept of subsidiarity principle that we utilize, and we say, okay, if we can establish a local level governance structure, and who will take charge of or be the leader of this local level governance are elected by the different localities and people in the different local level. They will act and do things in the interest of this particular communities that they will they have to administer the affairs, for example. So the work that we do, the governance part of work that we do, is to be able to create a tier or the third tier governance that is as close as possible to the local, to the local people. And the competency of that third tier governance or third tier government is provision of public services. Because they know best what the community needs and wants and how they want to develop themselves. And therefore, that part, that's how the way we think about public administration or administration of provision of public services, and then third tier local governance, the two are connected. And doing so will also directly help us build a future federal democratic union that we want to build from the ground up. Because there is no federal government or federal level government that we agree to and we wanted to establish right now. But by building this each block of locality in the country, if we can do that and do that well, gradually when we come together one day, we should be able to build a state. We should be able to build the whole country or the whole union by all these localities coming together. And I think that is very that's why building good local governance and public administration sector in each locality is very important for building a federal democratic union or country in the future from the ground up.
Right. Now, does this relate to some of the controversy that's come in the transition period and then after the coup of the GAD and the role of the GAD?
It's very related. It's very related because if we are able to if we want to build a federal democratic country, whatever the function or the role that GAD plays should be done by different local governments. And these different local governments, they have to have their own, for example, competencies that, for example, the future state constitutions allow them. And they don't have to be accountable to the superior or upward. They have to be accountable to the people who elect them.
Right.
That's how we change the directions of accountability as well. So it's very important that way. And if these local governance structure or public administrators are appointed by the top or the central government, we will remain the same as the previous general administration or even the previous governance system. So it's going to be a very centrally controlled, centralized, unitary system. But if we are able to build this third tier local governance and governments in the country, and then come together as a union later, it's going to be a very decentralized. They will be given a certain authority to take care of their own affairs, and then they come together as a union. At the union level, union level government will deal with the whole union-wide affairs and maybe even foreign affairs and external affairs even more. But right now, we are still in the process of doing that. And you can see in I think in Karenni, in Kachin, in some cases in Karen State or Kotule, we begin to do that.
It's really quite a striking example you're giving, because you're really talking about models that couldn't be more different, of a model of, as disgusting as it is to say, a model built on exploitation and being able to take as much as you can get from the people, to see them as your local bank and your everything that they have and they can provide as something that you're entitled to, and you can extract until there's nothing left, to be able to give to an elite group of very rich and powerful men that already have so much already, and trying to transition from, and again I use these words, a mafia terrorist kind of organization, to something that is fundamentally looking at this in a different way, a being accountable to the people and being what we think of as a governance structure to be. I've always kind of recoiled at the term in Burma when they talk about the military government, because as far as I've understood, this isn't a government in any sense of the word as we understand it. This is a misnomer, and saying this is even using the language to call it a military government instead of a military regime or military junta. This is indicating that, well, they may not be the best and it may not be democratically elected, but this is the government that we have. Well, no, it's not a government by any definition that I've ever understood a government to be. They are an extortion unit that happens to hold power and have a lot of weapons to enforce that power. And so the battle that you're waging and the ground level operations you're taking on is to fundamentally change that and promote a decentralized, democratized way of thinking, where those people in the positions, it's not the position is not one to seek out the greatest level of corruption and exploitation, but to look at your responsibility to those people on the ground. So that's going back to this analogy that we talked earlier on in your student days, of this real forceful battle of lightness and darkness. This, again, you couldn't have starker reliefs of the light and dark battling in the form of this governance.
Yes, exactly. I think this is something like, in order to remove darkness, you have to create more areas where light, you can create more light. And I think, this is what federalism is all about too. Politicians and people in the last 10 years or so, people talked about the word federalism. We want to establish federal democratic system. Federalism is all about division of competencies and authorities, right? Authorities. When you have authorities, all the authorities concentrated in one institution, one area, or one tier of government, that's very problematic. And I think what we are trying to do right now is, okay, what are the affairs of each localities that we think they should take care of them on their own? They should administer their own affairs. These are the affairs that they need to administer themselves. We have no business going in and telling them what to eat and how to run their city and how to drive in the city, etc. We even law enforcement, for example, in a certain area or certain city, the people, if you create city level government, and the government or officials at the city level governments are elected by the people themselves, they know how to take care of themselves, and they will. And only affairs that are, for example, related to the whole union or all the different states, okay, we take care of it at another level. So all we are doing right now is thinking about and trying to create the third tier, what we call local government, right? Third tier level governance. And these third tier level governance institutions are going to be the closest to the people, and therefore they will answer, and they are answerable to the people in their community, and they know best their own problems and how to solve them as well.
Now, you referenced this as something already starting to take shape, even in the revolutionary process that we're in, particularly in Katule and Kachin and Karenni, you mentioned. Can you give us some examples of some of the success stories as well as the challenges of how this type of training and type of thinking, type of administration is already bearing fruit?
Yes, I mean, in Kotuli, we recently also published, or we work with Korean National Union and published the Governance and Public Administration Handbook, where all these township level or district level administrator will refer to and will reference, and also, okay, this is how do we plan, or how do we make sure we consult with community and make sure the process is inclusive enough, and how do we deal with diversity, all these things. And I think we can see that in Karenni, the development of, for example, Karenni state level IEC, the state level governance, and how they allow different township or administer themselves, and different type of administrations that are emerging in the Karenni state, and also how the Korean National Union is transforming its township administration, and township administrators themselves, for example, make reference to the Governance and Public Administration Handbook, and they begin to deal with, for example, diversity that they have within their township. They begin to consult the public in their township and try to make certain decisions that are, relevant only for their township, etc. And I think this is a huge development emerging local level administration or governance that we are seeing post 2021 military coup. Because there is no SAC governance. There is no central governance, the presence of any sense of central level governance in the areas. So they are trying to do that. And, organization, or IEC Interim Executive Council in the Karenni and the Korean National Union in Kotuli are allowing their township and their districts to be able to run their own affairs. And I think this is a very good example that we see. This is not something that we cannot claim, or I cannot claim that we initiated this. They wanted to do this. We are helping along the process, trying to help build the capacity so that they can do the things that they want to do better and more efficiently too.
That's beautiful. I also contrast that with one of the criticisms that some of the EAOs and ethnic communities have received from various parts of the international community and observers have been that, well, look, these aren't really democratic organizations to begin with. They want autonomy. Sometimes they're engaged in illicit activities with the drug trade, or they have their own patriarchal attitudes already built into it. And so these are kind of Western fever dreams to think that these are perfectly wonderful democratic institutions that are going to replace this evil military. And we can't obviously talk about the different EAOs and ethnic organizations uniformly. There's many distinctions among them, but this is some pushback that we hear from observers and analysts on the scene, that these are that these are not inherently democratic institutions. These are institutions that simply want their own autonomy, and what they do with it is a whole different story. And yet you're presenting a story in these isolated cases of some real successes, and even more so, not going to them, but them coming to you for that education, which is really just remarkable. But how would you, for those listeners that are trying to square away these success stories that you're sharing and what other analysts have shared in some of these organizations being anti-democratic, non-democratic in their own ways and wanting different things, how would you sort that out?
Yes, I mean, we have to recognize first and foremost that these EROs, or ethnic revolutionary organizations, are playing a dual role. On the one hand, they are still in resistance or revolution mode. Right? On the other hand, they also have to govern, and they will want to be they play a governance institution role as well, and especially in areas that they control. So in some cases, what we are seeing is not a perfect democratic process. But for organizations that are engaging in revolution, this is a very impressive democratic process that these organizations are going through, especially when it comes to consultation with the public, for example, and especially when it comes to, for example, some good governance practices, and even some, for example, provision of public services and thinking about protecting the public even before, for example, strategizing military operations, etc. So I think the process may not be perfect, but the attitude, mentality, and the desire to pursue certain ways and approaches show us or tell us that these institutions are doing their very best, number one, to protect the people and take people into account as they plan for and make some decisions that will be impacting the people as well. So, and the only thing here is some organizations are ready to write everything down and, okay, you are accountable to this. Please go through this process, and you're going to have to go through this process, follow through this process, this procedure, etc. But in some areas, they barely started. They are not ready to put everything down in writing because there are other political implications, complications that they still have to sort out. So I think it is important that they are given a chance to sort out some political issue first, and then, start building and making the governance a little bit more systematic and improving on. So the way I see this is a very good start, a very good beginning, but it will be quite a long journey towards a more perfect democratic system and union one day. Right?
Sure. So with your answer, I think there's a couple different ways that interpretation could go. I think one is that I hear you expressing, look, this is a far from perfect process. This is messy. This is less than ideal circumstances. If I can extrapolate from what you said, you could go on to say how much were your own democratic processes in the West in terms of them being free from messiness, and just even looking at now some of our problems in the West and US and Europe that we're facing. So there's one way to look at all this and say, measure your criticism and look more carefully at the challenging circumstances that people are facing and what they're doing within those circumstances. And please give us time to sort this out. We're on the right track, and don't judge us to perfect textbook standards that even your own countries aren't following. That would be one way to look at it. Another way to look at it would be, again, to bring in that argument that is saying that there are some EAOs, EROs that are not necessarily committed to, that have shown anti-democratic or liberal processes already, and that there's not an indication that they are open to this type of change and interest, whether one is, and you mentioned 3 examples of places that are working towards this, but one can give examples of the AA or WA or TNLA or other organizations that are other parts of the country where maybe those success stories aren't quite there. And so for just to keep kind of pushing back against the or to contrast this rosy picture that you're bringing, this promising picture, which I don't want to rain on. I want to celebrate it for all it's worth, but I also want to be able to acknowledge some of the criticism that's there and give you that chance to respond to those voices that would push to the anti-democratic nature and real uphill battles that are not just a democracy is messy argument, but also is that, well, I don't know if this soil is really at all receptive towards this. So how would you respond to that?
Yes, I think I am fully aware of some organizations or EROs that are in a very early stage and they are unable to, for example, initiate this kind of this democratic process in the areas that they control. My only, not argument, but I will almost say like recommendation is to get the fundamental rights at the very beginning. Because if we don't get some fundamentals right at the very beginning, we may never get it right. We will never get it right. So the system may not be perfect. Let's say, for example, I understand that they are in the revolutionary stage, for example, at this time. We are too in the revolutionary stage. But I think because being in the stage of revolution should not be an excuse for us to not listen to the people.
Yeah.
And also, if we claim that this is the areas that we control or we want to govern, we have to govern the whole population. We cannot discriminate. This particular segment of the population is ours, and that is the other segment of population is not ours, and we cannot just treat them differently. So our standard of treating the population that, for example, who are under the our governance, for example, we have to treat them right and to treat them with the same standard, for example, and also listen to them, and we are part of them, and they give us the authority to for example, to govern. So that it is important how we understand where our authority to govern comes from.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not because my only warning is that we should not really think that we get to govern the population because we have the guns and we are able to control the area. If we think that political authorities come from the bearer of the guns, then that the directions that we are going is towards dictatorship. But if we think that we are given this authority, the consent of the governed. So I think right now we are in a revolutionary stage, but these different organizations understand, they at least understand that they need the consent of the people in order for them to establish a governance system. If we got that and they get that, I think they are heading towards the right directions. However, I think we have always had some EROs that they are never like the EROs that we understand or I am talking about today, because they never started like a revolutionary organization that worked for the people. So we want to make sure we distinguish certain EROs from the others as well.
That's a very powerful acknowledgement at the end, and so it makes me think what can be done about that. With that acknowledgement that there are certain EROs that have never seen the need or had the desire to want to have different structures that represented and was accountable to the people living in their territories. What does that mean for where we are now in this conflict and the future of a federal democracy in Burma?
Yes, I think some of the existence of some EROs are due to the current military regime and due to the Myanmar military itself. So I think one way to deal with some of those EROs is to empower and to build the capacity of the good EROs, EROs that are on the right track, and EROs that are really represent their people or the people that in the regions or in the areas that they control, empower them, and basically if we can empower them and if we can support them and if they can do more of what they do, I think other EROs will also will fade, right? Will fade. That is one way of doing that. But I also am aware that so long as the Dakish regime in Naypyidaw continue to exist and thrive, we will also have other their subsidiary ERO organization that are subsidiary to to the Naypyidaw regime. And I think it would be very difficult for us to continue dealing with them so long as we have that. And therefore, number one is to support and empower and strengthen the EROs, the good EROs. And number two, to make sure the source of these EROs that deal with the drugs issues and gambling issues and all these things. I mean, without Naypyidaw regime, they cannot survive. They are allowed and they are able to thrive in certain areas because the regime in Naypyidaw allows them, because it serves their purpose. And it is important that we do not accept it.
Another thing I'm thinking as you say this is such a remarkable story, and it's such a it's really just a piece of good news. It's not the ending story. It's still something in progress, but it's a feeling for optimism. It's a feeling that things are going in a very positive and hopeful direction, that we're seeing these signs of hope, that these long-standing feuds and tensions and cyclical patterns of violence and instability, that there are EROs that are, the desire is coming, the requests are coming from inside themselves to want to lead to a new future and to want to ask for help. And, really when we think on an individual level, we often think that when someone has come to a point that they're asking for help, they're admitting limitations, that's such a helpful sign of progress on an individual level. When someone says, I need help, I can't figure this out, I need to change in this way, and I don't know what to do. Just that moment of asking for help and admitting that that inability to find that desire to want to lead to a better direction, but that inability to know how to do it, that's such a hopeful sign in and of itself. And the fact that an organization like yourself is able to provide that help and provide that assistance of pointing to that better future, providing trainings and all other kinds of logistical support that you're doing. This is I don't want to overblow the optimism, because it's a very hard road ahead. It's a very, very hard road ahead. But this is, even within that struggle and turmoil that's going on, this is really great. This is really great that this is happening. And it's something that in a modest way should be celebrated and should be, and when one is trying to get through a difficult period, again, whether as an individual or something much wider, you need to celebrate these momentary markers of success and optimism to boost your morale, to know that there's a brighter day, to hold on to something with evidence that this is an evidence, that something I'm pointing to and that I'm holding on to, that good is happening, and this can be built on for something greater beyond this, not just a theory or something I'm telling myself or telling my friends in this bubble, but something actually happening that's actually results oriented, that could be a model that could be continuing to be built on, followed, expanded, everything else. And so, without wanting to move away to a sense of imagined optimism that ignores the rough road that's ahead, certainly, but wanting to highlight the small bits and even not so small bits of success that we can hold on to and celebrate. Is this something that you feel is not really known or celebrated or talked about as it should be within this whole struggle and problem? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think partly because due to security reasons, these stories are not out there a lot. Right? We don't hear a lot out there. But I think, let's say, for example, because, for example, potential airstrikes, right? And the regime can still launch airstrike against, different areas.
Yeah.
If we mention, okay, this particular area, we are developing the local level governance, and people are very active and they're doing this and that. The next day, it is possible that they will come and launch the airstrike in those particular area too. So I think stories are not out there as much as we feel they need to be out there. It's because people don't tell a lot of those stories specific to the locations or specific to certain particular to the area, because they are afraid of this potential airstrike and due to security reason. The other is the I think weakness on the part of international community itself. Partly because people, it's easy to, for example, if as part of your policy planning and as part of your in the process of people would like to hear the stories of this and that, it's easier for people to invite, already known people who are already in Washington D.C. and Bangkok and Brussels and London, and it's quite easier to just listen to people there and then formulate your policies. But I think it takes a lot more effort to look for people on the ground and to hear stories from people on the ground. So I think that effort is a little bit more, it's needed. On the other, so the first reason is for security reason, for people who are doing things on the ground themselves. And the second reason is extra efforts or additional efforts are needed in order for example, those stories on the ground to be connected with, for example, so that we can amplify and people to hear the real stories, but in a way that we are security conscious too. I am fully aware of security issues that people on the ground are facing on a daily basis, and I am fully aware of also the need for people who have the wherewithal to support this kind of development. So I think more story needs to be told. A story like this needs to be told. However, with the security consciousness in mind.
Sure. Yeah, and security is, of course, first and foremost the urgent consideration for all of this that precedes and is, prioritizes over all types of storytellings. That being said, where security issues can be accepted and worked on, and where stories can be told without specific references to individuals or organizations or locations, this gets into what we talked about before the interview of this sense of information war, and that there might be people that, as yourself and others, that are very plugged inside the loop and know what's going on, but then there are the rest of us, or even those of us who might know things in some sectors but not in others, which leads again to why we have this platform and the purpose of these conversations that we're having, to be able to do our small part in getting out these nuanced and informed opinions and perspectives and work of different engaged actors, to put it out there safely in the public sphere, so that this can contribute to that information more. But we're just one small platform, just doing what we can with a very small team, looking at the wider scope of the Myanmar story and narrative and coverage, both of how it's portrayed, journalists, where it's picked up internationally, which is seldom these days, as well as in terms of governments and international organizations. I think that these are the types of stories that, because these stories are not just informing morale, which is something, my last comment was more touching upon the importance of these stories in informing morale, something you could build upon, feel good about. It's not just informing morale, it's also informing policy. It's also informing perspective and analysis and how this conflict is going. And if this is not information that people have, and if instead they have information that these are organizations seeking their own autonomy away from democratic principles that are, and then this flows into the narrative we've heard for so long that the military is this kind of Cold War era mindset, that they're a bad actor, but they're a strong man, and sometimes you need a bad actor to hold everyone else together. And it's like, no, this is not the situation. They are. No one needs a mafia, genocidal, terrorist organization, quote unquote, holding it together. That's absurd. So these types of stories are not just contributing to affecting and impacting morale, but also in being able to contribute and engage in this information war, in this information landscape. Maybe war is too strong a word, in this information landscape, and to be able to give in proper information of positive directions that some of this is going in, that can then affect policy and support and international involvement and everything else.
Yes. I mean, I understand very well that most of us, or we have been focusing a lot on the bad things, that the regime has done and is currently on doing as well. And I think it is important that to keep on pointing, all these bad things that the regime has been doing to its own people in the country. So it's very important. However, if we focus on that alone, it's only half of the story. Because right now, it is important that we also focus on the good things that we do.
Of course, yeah.
The good things that we do, especially in order to replace the bad things that the regime has done.
Yeah.
So I think this kind of development on the ground at the local level with, us involving in the process is very important to highlight the good things and the positive things, or the positive things that are emerging from different localities, that even if, let's say, for example, the regime collapsed, or the regime is no longer there, and when we rebuild the country, we're going to need all these to be in place. The development of different localities and governance structure at the different localities, their understanding, their capacity, the way how they understand public administration, etc. If we have that ready, it will be just because the regime collapsed, there will be no power or authority or capacity vacuum, because the Myanmar military regime has proven to us that they don't have the capacity to build either nation or state,
or the interest.
They don't have any interest in doing that. But we are interested in. We want to prove that we are able to. We have the ability to do that. But we also need support from international communities and our neighboring countries to help us and support us in this process too.
And are you getting that support?
To some extent, but not as much as we think we need or the communities need.
Right. And it's very interesting. I'm pausing because I'm in my mind, I'm contrasting what you said, support internationally and support from regional actors. And these are two very different things, because not all of the regional actors are necessarily democratic themselves or have an interest in the military being out of power. So it does get much more complicated there, as we've seen with the challenges of ASEAN and their involvement. Yeah.
Yes. So it's a continuing struggle. We need to continue advocating both our neighboring countries or regional countries. Some of them are not supportive to our cause at all, but nonetheless, they continue to be very important for our further, progress that we make. But I think in as much as, let's say, for example, EROs are not really as united as we want them to be, I think international communities are also, they're coming from different directions, and sometimes it's very confusing, right? For example, even among ASEAN countries, different understanding of Burma's issue and different approach. And I think, of course, European countries and United States, North America, they also have different approach. East Asian countries, for example, Korea and Japan, they also have a different approach. But it is, we think it would be a lot better if the international community and the regional countries coordinate as well, or are able to coordinate as well.
Yeah. Now, one other question I want to ask you is, we've been contrasting a lot. We've contrasted one ERO event against another, contrasted international and regional actors, and the type of individuals you were training and the military commanders that were posted there. Another contrast I want to make to analyze and better understand the distinction between these is, when you first introduced what you were doing, you contrasted it yourself with the local ground governance that you were trying to promote, little by little, building up from the bottom, with more the top-down approach of looking at a federal democracy charter, a constitution, the looking at the elections, or some other real elite top structures that a lot of focus has been on. And in some ways, you presented the local governance structures that you're trying to set up as really intentionally as a contrast to these top-down structures, which there seemed to be an indication that if all you're doing is these top-down, you don't necessarily have the same confidence that they'll succeed, because they're not being built from the bottom, they're being imposed, and something that's being imposed can very easily not be adhered to or manipulated or not followed in some kind of way or the other. And so I'm wondering where you see the relationship, because I just want to pause before this question to provide a little bit more of that context that of course, there has to be some relationship between the ground context that you're setting up and the strength of these institutions to be able to rise on their own, and the overall more bird's eye view of what kind of system that they're operating in there and what kind of structure and guidelines and rule of law has been set out. So there has to be some kind of relationship there. I'm wondering where you see the relationship between this bottom-up approach that you're promoting, these ground-level institutions, and because you have set that up to contrast with the strictly top-down approach, where does that top-down approach of looking at the Federal Democracy Charter, the Constitution, where does that come into play with what you're trying to build in the bottom?
Yes, actually they are related, and they have to be related very closely, actually. And I think both approach, we have to approach from both directions simultaneously, and we're going to have to meet somewhere at some point, right? So encouraging and promoting from the ground up approach doesn't necessarily mean we can undermine the approach from the top as well, because for example, the development of Federal Democracy Charter, whatever the part that talks about the future Federal Democratic Union, part 1, I guess, is very important and fundamental. It lays the foundation for the future, what kind of a Federal Democratic Union we would like to establish in the future. What I personally have difficult time understanding or agreeing to is the interim arrangement or the part 2 of Federal Democracy Charter. But we can have differences in opinion, and it's okay. But we want to make sure we all agree to the type of Federal Democratic Union that we would like to establish, and therefore we started building the foundation for that. So the next level or the next step is, for example, even in each state and region, they also need to build their own, for example, come up with their own constitutions that basically outlines what kind of states, regions, or different units within the union that they would like to build, what kind of political system, structure, etc. So that legal document, you can call it a state constitution, or you can call it state basic law. It doesn't matter, but a document or a legal foundation that outlines the future type of states and structures that we would like to build. What is the connection is whatever local governance that we are establishing or we are trying to establish that has the public administration component at the local level, it needs some kind of legal ground or legal foundation. And that legal foundation has to be provided in the state or region level, or the federal document, the federal constitution or democracy charter that we outline, because we're going to have to talk about what competency these local governance, what kind of competencies and authorities will remain with these local governments, and what in the future we will have to share at the central level or at the union or federal level. So the meeting points is the drafting or writing of all these states and region level constitutions or legal documents that we need to produce. only then we will say, okay, what competency these states and region level governance will have, and what competency will remain with the local level government, and that a legal document that outlines division of competencies and authorities for local government, for state level government, or state or region level government, federal unit level government, and also the federal government too. So that's a meeting point, I think. That's a meeting point, because all these local governance or governance entities that we are establishing cannot exist or cannot continue to operate in a vacuum for a long time.
Yeah, right.
For the interim period, it's okay. We started with that. But at some point, we need a legal foundation, and it has to be at the state or region level documents, and in some cases, it can be at the federal level constitution as well.
It's just such a compelling journey that you've shared yourself, of going from a student activist to a student, whose education was interrupted, as so many students were then and have recently, to a student activist, to in the jungle and continuing with education, and the 9-year program that you ran on the ground until the coup, and then switching over into this public governance. This has just been a remarkable personal journey that has impacted the country and society in the process and going forward. So I think it's really shown a light on and a window into not just your journey, but this journey of a country, one little part of it. So I really thank you for that. And I would also like to invite you, before we close, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would also like to talk about?
Thank you for this opportunity. I see this as an opportunity, and I think it is also important for our country people to hear positive stories, and it is possible for them to rebuild their country or to build a new country from the ground up. And that potentiality and that possibility is a big hope for everyone in our country, I guess.
We want to take a moment to introduce you to our nonprofit Better Burma's online shop, which features handicrafts sourced from artisan communities scattered throughout Myanmar. Far from being mass-produced knockoffs, the pieces we offer are unique and handmade, reflecting the wide diversity of different peoples found throughout the country. When Myanmar experienced its transition period, moving from democracy in the late 2010s after decades of harsh military dictatorship, many Burmese craftspeople hoped their beautiful work could finally be appreciated beyond the country. When Myanmar experienced its transition period, moving towards democracy in the late 2010s after decades of harsh military dictatorship, many Burmese craftspeople hoped their beautiful work could finally be appreciated beyond the country's borders. But sadly, this was not to be so. Following the military coup, many skilled artisans suddenly found all possibility of continuing their livelihood closed off and began struggling just to feed their families. With this in mind, we prioritize working with artisans from disadvantaged and vulnerable backgrounds because we know just how hard it can be to survive at the margins of society in Myanmar. This includes such people as those with disabilities, mothers who have contracted HIV/AIDS, civil servants on CDM, ethnic and religious minorities, and more. To view these wonderful pieces, please visit alokacrafts.com. That's Aloka, A-L-O-K-A, crafts, C-R-A-F-T-S. One word, alokacrafts.com. Otherwise, please consider a donation through our usual channels. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give it another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
Oba yarananda dayananga yaranaya dayanang poda yaranam